This is one of the major topics which is difficult to deal with throughout the world. Very difficult to see these abuses taking place. Since the advent of internet, the monitoring of these abuses has become extremely difficult. So it's usually an international effort to prevent the children to be trafficked or be abused. And this abuse can happen transnationally. Someone in England can be abusing a child in anywhere in the world through the net. So it has become multiple ways that people can abuse children. So these abuses has been happening historically, has always happened. It is almost accepted in all cultures in the past, but not sexual abuse. The physical abuse and physical treatment, physical beating, emotional abuse, in some cultures it's encouraged because it's supposed to grow your personality, your character, which could be thought as a very flawed thinking, in the past. So historically, according to accumulated thoughts and researchers and all that, this kind of abuse shouldn't be taking place in vulnerable children or any children at all. However, in many countries, this kind of abuse, whatever kind of abuse, is illegal. You would have heard one of the Malaysians for beating his child in Sweden. He was sentenced to jail for a few months or years, and the children were taken away. So, but it's accepted in many cultures now also, like many places in Asia, the physical beating and emotional and verbal abuse is almost accepted. The reason being the child is behaving badly, is uncontrollable, is very difficult to manage, and etc. So when you see, it can begin from very basic things like non-provision of food, non-provision of education, shelter, uh, to the extreme part where they are sexually and physically abused. Uh, so the abuse can be classified very widely, So when you see the abuse taking place, epidemiological studies have shown that 70% of the population reported some form of abuse at some point in their life. So what the report shows that is 70% of the people reported abuse, some part of their childhood life before the age of 18. Among women, 30% of women were sexually abused. Among small children, children below the age of 12, 54% of the children reported some form of abuse, some emotional abuse, physical abuse. 28% reported physical abuse. 8% of all children reported sexual abuse. That's a large amount considering 8% of all children has reported sexual abuse. So the abuse is quite rampant, but sexual abuse is not. Although it's very high rate, and again, these things all these things can lead to some psychopathology as the children grow up. It causes a lot of difficulties. Even with physical abuse and sexual abuse, we could be prolonged physical abuse and sexual abuse or sexual abuse can lead to a lot of development of psychopathology in these children when they grow up, as we can see further. So when we talk about in the classification of abuse, we can see that the main feature, the number one, like many cases, there are cases of neglect, which is very mild, not provision, sometimes not providing food, once in a while, not complete neglect, just like leaving them without care for a while. This can happen quite regularly and also quite widely without being noticed, So unless the social services in the particular country is very observant and take note of this and take action. Otherwise, most of it will go neglect, me not sending them to school, not providing them for proper food, not providing them with proper physical activities, not providing them with proper shelter, not providing them with proper clothing, not providing them with proper protection, this kind of stuff. This is quite rampant all over the place. It happens. Emotional abuse also is very highly, we can see a high rate of emotional abuse in children who are any places. These abuses basically takes place depending on the character of the parent, depending on the character of the child, or depending on the illness of the child, or depending on other circumstances like socio-economic circumstances, job circumstances, everything, every aspect of our family growth is related to whether the child is being abused or not. Somehow, socioeconomic status, financial status, education status, housing, which type of area they're living in, the crowding, all that can contribute to whatever abuse we are talking about. So the etiology causes, you see, mainly where these abuses take place is like more like it's not like all the single parent will be abusing their kid. If you see what do you call it, a normal couple, there's some form of abuse there. Single parents will have higher rate of abuse than the normal parental upbringing, So if the family have alcohol and drug abuse, there are higher chances that the child might be neglected or abused. Uh, and unemployment causes because of financial difficulties and overcrowding, like I stated earlier. Step parents sometimes can cause a lot of difficulties in the house and cause abuse, or development of psychiatric illness in the family. Child illness also. You see, a child with ADHD, definitely he'll be abused more than a normal kid. That's undoubted. A child with autism may be abused more compared to normal kids. So disability of the child, a child who have a lot of physical illness where the parents have to work very hard to maintain the child, and they're losing a lot of money, they might be inclined to be shouting at the child and very angry with the child and all that. So it's a multi-pronged etiological features that we have which can contribute to development of abuse towards their children. So the presentation can be very varied, but as you know, the abuses can be, although verbal abuse is not like very clear cut unless the neighbors or someone complain about it. Verbal abuse can go on like almost unnoticed for a long, long time, you know. Physical abuse is come to our attention very rare too, you know, unless some people take proactive action towards some parents or anyone abusing children, you know. So it's like a major field that many people don't even want to go there, you know. So the care, even that, because everyone around will feel like, you know, that's not my business. I won't interfere. Let him be this child. It's his problem, not my problem, you know. So that kind of thinking is like quite still there. You know, if he has a child, he has every right to beat him until, like, you know, he's admitted to the hospital. That's not right. You know, you beat him every day. That's not right. So the people will be reluctant to complain. So the awareness by the state of this thing happening should be quite extreme. That these things, the state should be equipped to deal with this problem in the community by having community teams, you know. So it's very, very difficult. So when we see the presentation of uh, children who are abused, we talk about more the extreme part of the abuse, you know. We are talk about the sexual part, sexual abuse. So the presentation can be very varied, very early. If let's say a 10-year-old comes with conversion symptoms, like she behaving like she's paralyzed, not able to walk, not able to stand, suddenly out of the blue, you know. So there's something happening to the kid. You know, abuse is one of the possibilities. If a child very young, 8-year-old, 9-year-old like that become very depressed, so these are the one of the possibilities that the child can undergo, might be going through, you know, some form of abuse. If the child is abnormal in a functioning, you know, so the presentation can be varied from very young age until they are much older. The presentation can be varied depending on the age of abuse. If a child is abused very young, let's say a child, 3-year-old, 4-year-old was sexually abused for many years, the child cannot develop normally, cannot develop normally. The child will have, although the child is sexually abused from the age of maybe 3 to 7 like that. After that, everything is all right. The child can't, impossible for the child to be normal because the integration of self is disrupted. The feeling of the self is destroyed very young. You know, depending on how long the abuse is taking place. If a person around the 16-year-old, 17-year-old adolescent, teenager was maybe sexually assaulted or interfered with once, that might not lead to severe psychopathology. But if a child is abused for a prolonged period, very young age, the pathology features, the self-development, the development of the whole personality, everything will be destroyed, you know. And the duration of the abuse also quite important because these abuses are usually happen within the family, people who are close. It's very rarely someone from outside, far away, come and abuse the child and go away. It always happens around only, around the child only. That's the only possible way. Who are the people around the child? Mother, father, brother, sister, auntie, uncle. These are the people. So the abuse happens around this only. Sometimes it's very, very difficult to confront, to take action, to do things, you know. Sometimes it's very, very difficult to attempt to repair too, you know. So the duration of abuse is, if it's prolonged, the damage is quite long lasting. Usually, like I said, the perpetrators is usually known, you know. It can affect multiple domain of the person's life, you know, from emotional domain from intelligence can be affected. Then you have your functioning ability, your future substance abuse possibility, future development of post-traumatic stress disorder, future development of antisocial personality disorder. So many things can develop as a result of a person being abused. So the longer the abuse, the more severe it is. The more vulnerable a child is, the more severe the consequence for the child would be. So like we said, like, any physical or sexual kind of abuse will have a consequence of it. We have scars, bruises, burns, signs of malnourishment, unusual and unexplainable fractures, other unusual presentation like burn marks, uh, like other things like on physical examination. Usually they do any kind of case of abuse, they do the examination, all the on whenever they get admitted. So whatever we suspect, we do the investigation and we do a report on uh, whatever physical harm has been done. Is part of the physician's responsibility to examine them and what kind of damage they have done. But emotional damage is long lasting and a lot of care need to be taken for a long period of time for them to recover. The earlier the intervention take place, the better the outcome is. Let's say someone gets abused from the age of 5 to 8 or something like that, and then you realize that the child was abused. Then after they let it be for a while, maybe 4 or 5 years, and the child is okay, functioning okay. Then at the age of 14, 15, started harming herself, cutting herself, taking overdoses, want to kill herself, and after that have multiple sexual relationship and that kind of stuff. So it's always a consequence of. It's always consequence of the abuse. If someone develops some personality disorder as they grow up, and you know that they have developed personality disorder, then highly likely they would have been sexually abused. Uh, Psychosocial presentation, these are the things I told you. These are the illnesses they can develop later on in their life, depending on uh, their age. Like antisocial behavior can develop. Borderline personality is quite common in children who are sexually abused when they were young. Depression is always there. Depressive illness with suicidal ideation is quite common in people who have been sexually or physically abused when they are young. Their life becomes a little bit more miserable than normal people with low confidence, low self-esteem, self-degrading ideas. You know, that kind of features are quite common. Yeah. So anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder is quite common in sexual abuse. There can be chronic kind of post-traumatic stress disorder, which would be quite difficult to treat. So the investigation we do on these patients who are coming with sexual abuse or physical abuse or whatever abuse they go through. Usually we do just the basic test and all that to find out, and psychological tests and what are the impact of this abuse has had on the person, social investigation to find out, to investigate how to get the child away from that particular abusive environment. And we have to find out the social services to take immediate action towards the safety of the child. And they form a team. Usually they have a team of social workers, pediatrician, psychologists, all working together towards the well-being of the particular child. So ideally what they would do is, like, instead of placing these children in a residential care setting, it would be more advisable to place them in a foster care place. Foster care place, that system is not available here, I suppose. But foster care is something that which is very beneficial, where the child, usually these children who are abused will be around, 9 to 15-year-old, So your foster care, meaning you take the child, you put them in a safe environment, you appoint a social worker to not to look after her, to regularly monitor her. The parents, the foster parents, usually are vetted by social service department. They have a process of vetting these parents. Any parent can apply to be a foster parent. Usually they take people who are a little bit older, where their children has grown up a little bit, and they have time to look after teenage children. They'll be paid by the state weekly. So that system seems to be quite good. But occasionally they need to place in a residential care because the child or adolescent showing extreme kind of behavioral abnormality, like suicidal ideas, and actively becoming very aggressive, or the child himself becomes sexualized, where he can't uh, stop himself, from sexually assaulting people. So these are the things that we need. Like, it gets school report, social workers report, everything. We gather together, and we have a multidisciplinary team, and we discuss everything together, and we decide what is the best course of action. And on top of it, most importantly, what the state has to provide for us. We must know what the state can provide for us before we can take action. We can have a lot of grandiose ideas saying that we can do this, do that for this child. Whether the state has this facility or not, that's the most important thing. And what are the other help is available from non-governmental organizations. So these are the things we can work. And in addition to that, the treatment is very, very complex, depending on uh, how the impact of this abuse has on the child. If the child is developing fairly okay, but you have taken him to a safe environment, after that, if he's developing fairly okay, we don't need much of intervention. If the child is not okay, he has developed other features like self-injurious behavior, depressive illness, or post-traumatic stress disorder, or anxiety disorder, or school refusal. So we have to work accordingly. Uh, Psychological treatment usually is like uh, cognitive behavior therapy, like teenagers you can do, more cognitive behavior therapy, dialectic behavioral therapy kind of thing for borderline personality disorder and such. Socially, like I told you, the placement of a proper placement, back to school, for them to function well, and then after that, reintegration with the family is a long shot but possible if the family is not the perpetrator. If the family is the perpetrator, then it becomes much more difficult, to send him back to the family. Possible, because maybe in some instances the child is physically abused because he is ADHD. He's creating havoc at home. The father beat him, and that's physical abuse. Father has been beating him several years. Now, okay, he saw a doctor, the child is okay, he's taking his medication, he's going to school regularly, no problem, father is happy. So can we send him back to home? I think we can, because he's the father anyway. So we can rehabilitate him, work with the family therapy, and all that we can work. But resources are most important. To look after the sexual abuse victims, we need resources. Without resources, we can't do much. It's a major field. Okay, guys, that's it, man. So, management, immediate, long-term management, and psychological management, DBT, supportive therapy, and all that. So, management in social aspect, residential placement, financial aid, worry about pregnancy. What are you going to do if the person get pregnant? The girl get pregnant. It's all very difficult. You know, those days, like let's say in Catholic Europe, if you're pregnant, you're finished. Yeah, your child will be taken away. Maybe they kill the child. And also make you like a servant. They will be placed under the care of nuns, and you'll be abused physically. So pregnancy is a very bad word in the pregnancy is the most difficult thing for teenage girls to handle. If they get pregnant, they are finished. Nowadays, they are more merciful in the developed countries. In Malaysia, not very clear how merciful they are, you know. Uh, and as a result of that, a lot of children are abandoned, left out, without care. Uh, okay. But actually, the abuse actually can be reduced with proper monitoring and proper social service system, working together with the health department, uh, can be reduced. But I doubt whether we can eradicate it totally. Even one aspect of it also is very difficult to eradicate completely. It's not a virus, not a bacterial illness. It's a human behavior which has been entrenched since millennia, thousands of years. The abuse part of human being. So it can be reduced definitely. With fear, you can reduce it. With law, with trick action, with extreme action, we can reduce it definitely. But to eradicate is almost possible because a lot of these are involving human emotion. The human emotions are sometimes uncontrollable. So the NGOs can play a big role in the future, or currently also they are playing a big role to help women who are abused, children who are abused. You know. On top of it, as I said, like government enforcement of to reduce the abuse. Not to say it doesn't happen in Malaysia. So abuse happens everywhere. So government has to acknowledge and work towards improving the standard of care for children and adolescents.